Hey everyone, Harrison Reed here. One of the most common questions I'm asked is how to find the right journal to submit an article to. How to find the right journal for anything you're writing or hoping to get published. It's a super common problem, and it's one that you have to figure out for every single article you hope to get published. But there's a simple way of breaking down a couple of key attributes about the journals themselves that'll make the whole process easier and make you able to figure out exactly how to match the article you're working on to the right journal. Now, those two attributes that we're going to break down today are called the scope and the audience of the journal. So we're going to take them one at a time and break down how to figure out the scope and the audience of any journal you're considering submitting your work to. All right, let's start off with the scope. The scope of the journal is essentially all of the content that the journal is focused on. Basically their territory, what they care about, the subject matter on which they publish. So the scope is their entire area of concern for the publisher, the editor, and what appears within the pages of that journal. You can think of the scope as basically their area of concern. So when you're thinking about scope, think about content. The content of the journal. The scope is really important because things that fall outside of the scope of the journal will probably be an automatic rejection for that journal. When we looked at this at JAAPA and looked at all of the research articles that we rejected, we found that over 40% of the reason we were rejecting original research was because it fell outside the scope of the journal, meaning people had been publishing things or hoping to publish things that were not of concern to our journal itself. So they might have been trying to submit something about molecular research or bench research on something outside of medicine, or even within medicine, something that has nothing to do with what we care about as a journal. That's one of the easiest ways to automatically reject something as a journal editor. The next thing that we really care about when we're examining a journal is the audience of that journal. It's sort of similar to scope in that this is the territory of the journal, but this is who we see as the ideal reader of the journal. We know that when we create an article or anytime we publish an entire issue of a journal, that a very specific type of person is who we are hoping will read it. We probably know who our existing readership is, we know who we want to retain as readership, and we know who we would love to bring in as new readers to our journal. This is the qualities of the reader themselves. So this might be the type of person, the type of professional, the type of expertise that the reader has, but we know we're going to be publishing content on a certain level that's going to be both appealing to that reader and also at their level of understanding so that we're not dumbing things down for our ideal reader or going over their head. So our audience is really our ideal reader, multiplied over thousands of different readers that we hope to get. So this is the person that we are sort of tailoring all of our content to. So when we think about scope and audience, we're going to be looking at the intersection of those two things. Is this journal focused on the content that I'm looking to submit to them? And am I writing this content in such a way that's going to appeal to that ideal reader that the journal has? So am I, as an author, helping that editor get to where they want to get? Am I giving them material they care about? And am I writing it specifically for the reader that they care the most about? Let's look at some examples of scope and audience for a few different journals, and I think it'll give you a good idea of what we're talking about. All right, let's look at one journal called Chest. This is put out by a large organization that cares about chest physicians. Basically, these are clinicians that are dealing with things like pulmonary medicine, critical care medicine, sleep medicine, anything that goes on within, the patient's chest. So this is a very specific scope that this journal cares about. If you were to submit something to this journal under diabetes or any other endocrinology topic, it would probably be an automatic rejection. It's not that your content is bad, it just doesn't fall within their area of concern. It's outside of their scope, so they would probably give it an automatic rejection. However, if you were publishing something on a pulmonology topic or a critical care topic, you're much more likely to get at least a very solid consideration. Now, it's not just about the scope. Remember, we also need to worry about the audience of this journal. So, what is their audience? Well, it's primarily physicians, but also other clinicians working in those areas. They do have a PA on their editorial board, so they care about people like physicians, PAs, nurse practitioners, that kind of thing, but they're probably not going to be catering their material to a very, very novice level, like a general medicine student, and they're probably not going to be tailoring their content to something like a layperson, maybe a sleep apnea patient's guide. That's not going to fall within their audience. So the content that's tailored to those audiences outside of their target audience is probably not going to be accepted. So if you're looking to submit something to CHEST, before you waste your time formatting your manuscript and submitting it and doing all of those things, you have to ask yourself, am I within their scope and am I appealing to their ideal audience? If the answer to one of those is no, you can save everyone's time and just move on and try to find a better journal. All right, let's look at the same thing with JAAPA. JAAPA is a journal of the American Academy of PAs. It's one of the flagpole journals for the PA profession, and it covers a broad scope. So JAAPA appeals to any area of medicine that PAs work in. So basically their scope is anything where a PA might be working within that area. That's pretty much all of medicine. It's a broad scope, but it also means that the audience itself is pretty broad. So if you're working in an area as a PA and you might want to read an article, then that might be appealing to the general audience of that journal. However, we have to be careful because it doesn't mean that anything that we publish that a PA might read would make it to the journal. We want to make sure that we're capturing a sizable chunk of the audience that JAAPA cares about. So if I'm submitting something to JAAPA and it's an article that PAs would love to read, but only about 1% of PAs would ever read it, then it might not appeal to the entire audience of JAAPA. See, I need to capture a big enough chunk of the readership that the editors know they're not going to be losing readers with a particular article. It's not a perfect process, and with something as broad as JAAPA, you're probably unlikely to capture 100% of the audience all of the time. Remember, the PA profession is pretty fragmented among specialties, but if we can feel that like 1 in 5 readers is really going to care about an article, for something like JAAPA with a really broad scope and a really broad audience, that might do it. There's other articles that cut across all kinds of specialties, so things like workforce research that pertains to the PA profession would probably have broad appeal to the PA audience and would probably be something that JAAPA would be really interested in. So think about that scope, which is really broad, anything in the PA world, including all areas of medicine, but also non-clinical areas that deal with the PA profession, and then think about the audience itself, any of those PAs, but keeping in mind that we probably need to capture a specific and significant chunk of that PA audience in order to appeal to enough of it to get an acceptance. We can contrast something like JAAPA with another PA-specific journal, JPAE. Now, this is a journal that's focused specifically on PA education, PA faculty, and PA students. So this is a journal with a much narrower scope than JAAPA. If there's a general medicine topic, it's probably going to be outside of the scope of JPAE. However, the scope is more focused, so it's much easier to figure out if your content will fall within the scope of JPAE. So for instance, if you're writing an article about the publication patterns of PA faculty, that bullseyes the scope here. Where that article might not find as many readers in something like JAAPA, where the scope and the audience are more broad, it makes up a bigger chunk of the JPAE audience interest, and so you're more likely to get that more niche topic into a journal like JPAE. We can similarly look at the audience of JPAE and see that it's also more narrow. So maybe it's not all of the PA profession that's reading this journal, but it's PA educators, PA program directors, PA faculty, a narrower group, but one that we can really tailor material to. So if you're an editor of JPAE, you really know exactly what you care about. So you're going to look, is this within the scope of my journal? Meaning, does this pertain to PA education, PA faculty, or PA students? And is this hitting the audience? Now, remember, the audience is faculty and PA educators, so if it's an article written specifically for instance, PA students, it's probably going to fall within the scope, but outside of the audience. So you're only hitting one of those two, and you probably won't be accepted. So those articles that are written for JPAE should really be written for that specific audience of PA educators. So if your content is falling within the scope, and you're writing that article for the correct audience, you're much more likely to get an acceptance in something like JPAE. Okay, so just to recap, whenever you're looking for a journal, you need to know what the scope and the audience of that journal is. You need to ask yourself, does the content I'm writing fall within the scope of that journal? And you need to ask yourself, am I writing it for the audience that that journal cares about? If you have yes to both of those questions, you're probably pretty well off proceeding through the submission process. I know that scope and audience can be a little bit murky, there can be some gray zones, and so really the best way to figure out what the scope of a journal is and what audience they're looking for is just to read that journal. The more issues you read, the more content you read within each issue, the better idea you'll get about what they're publishing, and you can match your submissions to that journal more accurately. So you'll spend less time on rejections, you'll spend less time hunting down journals that don't want your work, and more time targeting your work specifically to areas where it has a high likelihood of getting published. I hope this video was helpful. If you liked it, please hit the like button, please subscribe to the channel, share it with anyone you think might benefit from it, and if you want more writing help, go to harrisonreedwriting.com. I have tons of resources that'll help you with your writing and your efforts to get published. Good luck, and I'll catch you next time.